Welcome to Be Ablaze. We're lighting a fire in you to move you from ordinary to extraordinary, living out your blaze for life. I am your host, Polly Hamp. Let's be ablaze. Hello and welcome to Be a Blaze podcast. I am your host, Polly Hamp, and I'm so excited today. If you will notice, I have my amazing husband, Bob Hamp, again with us. He was with us a few weeks ago in episode 8. And if you haven't listened to it, we talk about identity. It is an incredible podcast with lots of downloads and lots of listens. So you will definitely want to go listen to it because it is so helpful and so informative. But today I have him back to talk about patterns for change. We're going to talk about family of origin, just the patterns in our lives and how they get formed. And he is a master in this, literally, because you have a master's in this. He's a marriage and family.
But so far, I haven't been able to get you to call me master.
We will have a whole nother conversation about that, but that will not be on a podcast. But my love, let me introduce you first. That's his family of origin, and I will not play it out for him anyway. But he's a licensed marriage and family therapist and a business consultant as well. We both co-own Think Differently Counseling, Consulting,
Coaching,
Connected Cookies, Corgis, all the things. And we also co-own the Think Differently Academy, which is our online academy. But we'll talk about that later. But today he does business consulting and is a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I want to bring that up again within the introduction because the question I have, I guess I didn't give you a chance to say hi because you interrupted me and like, why don't you call me master?
Heaps.
Yeah. But I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And it was so much fun last time.
It was.
I really enjoyed that and look forward to today's conversation.
Yeah. So I love getting to ask him questions. And it's weird kind of doing this format, being husband and wife, because we've done a lot of teaching together. And we still do teaching together. But it's just funny. He goes, hey, babe, you want to be on my podcast? So here we are.
Interview me.
I'm going to interview you. But the question I have is, you do the business consulting. You're doing more and more of that these days.
Yeah.
And I know it's fun for me to watch you because it lights you up because it's very much in your wheelhouse. And you've been doing it just within the family system by being a licensed marriage and family therapist. That is such a mouthful.
It is a lot of syllables.
And there's so many. I want to just ask you, how do these two, how do they fit together?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a great beginning to have the conversation because, again, a lot of people think that with a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, I learned the principles of how marriages work and how families work. Mm-hmm. And while that's not untrue, it is a completely different perspective. So let me say it this way first. Marriage and family therapy as a discipline isn't a psychological theory. It's a communications and systems-based theory.
Okay.
And so a psychological theory would look more at kind of like, how is somebody wired on the inside? So somebody presents with a symptom. Let's say that their symptom is stress and anxiety. So they would look at how are they wired on the inside, what kind of thought processes do they have, and where might those thought processes come from? Marriage and family therapists will look and say, what relationships in their life are wired into the way they think, the way they feel, and therefore the way they respond daily. And so if you change those relationships, how can you change their internal experience and therefore change their symptom? And so when we talk about it being a communications and systems-based approach, it's much less about the past and much more about the present and the future. And it's much more about the interactional components of their life, i.e., everybody listening has a mother, everybody listening has a father. And even if you don't know them, even if you've never met them, somebody raised them, somebody influenced their development, somebody influenced their sense of self. And then they repeated that, which I'm sure we'll talk about that in a few moments. Yeah. Whatever it was that they gained as a sense of self, they immediately began to reproduce the system around them. And so what happens is we play a certain role in our family of origin. Wherever we go in our life, we begin to play that role where we go. And so the principles of organization, communication, structure, process that are consistent within a family also function exactly the same way inside businesses and organizations. So not only have I worked with businesses, I've worked with school systems, I've worked with churches, I've worked with departments within organizations, I've worked with county government, county organizations, because within any human organization, the same principles that apply to family change also apply to organizational change.
So what I think I hear you saying is that everywhere we go, there's always a system being played out.
Yes.
And we bring our own system with us, contingent on the system that we grew up in. Then we go into another system and we either clash or we mold to, or we create or recreate a whole system.
Like multiple interactive galaxies, right? They're
Yeah,
all
that's
kind of
right.
orbiting together.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that can either be enraging, oh, I can't believe I'm repeating that pattern, or it can be incredibly freeing because once we see it,
Yeah.
it's like now that you see how the system actually works, you can actually make changes that when you're trying to change things in a linear way before, you actually play into the very thing that you're trying to change. Quick example,
Yeah,
right?
please do. 'Cause
I'm not, but imagine for a second that I was the oldest child in my family.
yeah, you are
Right.
not.
And again, systemically, an oldest child relates to the parents and siblings in a particular way, so they become fairly responsible. They feel like they're responsible for both their siblings and sometimes for their parents. They take on responsibility that's not theirs and a number of other characteristics. And so that characteristic of developing a sense of over-responsibility goes with them when they leave the family. Now they take on roles, whether in relationships or in professions or social circles, where they chair the committee. They become the manager of the department. Even if they're not the manager of the department, they try to run the department.
Yeah.
They feel responsible, so they take on roles with excessive responsibility. And so now imagine for a second, they marry another oldest child, and that oldest child also feels responsible. You could have a real kind of battle of the wills between two oldest children who get married, and one might think it's the other and the other might think it's the one, but it's really the interaction between the two that creates the dynamic. You can't change what's happening without changing the organizational dynamic. You can't just get one person to try harder, because they'll try harder at the role that they know.
Oh, yeah.
So often when people, one of the reasons why the systems approach is so crucial is when people try to make changes in a linear fashion, they use the role that they've always played to try to make those changes.
It's like you can't change a problem at the problem level.
Right. As
Einstein says.
Yeah, you can't change a problem using the level of thinking that created the problem in the first place. And the level of problem is you came into every organization you came into with, the term is introject.
Okay.
You've got this internal representation of the family that you are a part of and the role that you played in it. So you unconsciously create that organization around you. And as you unconsciously create it, to try to change what's wrong, people often think, I experienced this growing up, and I experienced this in my last job, and I experienced it in my marriage.
Why does this keep happening to me? Why do I keep having the same relationships? Why do I keep having the same kind of crappy jobs and the same kind of crappy boss?
That's exactly what people say, and that's exactly what people feel.
So I just want to pause for a second. Those are good keywords because I know you're going to talk a bit at the end, but those are like when we think that way, it's like, why do I always have crappy relationships? Why do I date the same guy? Why do I date the same kind of girl? Why do I always have the same sexist boss? Or, why? You almost think it's, instead of thinking law of attraction, you think of what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them or woe is me. And
why does this always keep happening?
Why does this always happen to me?
Thought number one. Thought number two is, why does everybody else always keep doing that thing? It depends. It depends whether you have an internal locus of control, it's up to me, or an external. Why does everybody else, the world's got to change?
Yeah.
So whichever one it is, that's your picture of why things don't ever change.
Why does everybody drive so slow?
Yeah. And so when you have those kind of repeated experiences in life, why is the same thing happen to me at work as happened to me growing up, as happens in my marriage? It's for all the reasons that I always say. We repeat our family of origin patterns until we don't.
Say it again.
Yeah, that could be the thesis statement overarching not just this conversation.
We're not going to call it patterns for change. We're going to call it You're going to repeat your family of origin until you don't.
Why don't patterns change?
Yeah.
But the whole thing is, once you see it, that pattern can become the engine for change.
Yes.
Because what that means is if you change you change the pattern.
Yes.
But typically what happens is people from within the pattern try to change everything else. I've got a great illustration for that in a second, but I'll repeat it again. We repeat our family of origin patterns until we don't. And the don't isn't simply because we will ourselves to do better next time. We have to see in a whole new way, or as I'd like to say, think different. Once we think in a different way, even thinking in a different way begins a change in the pattern because we change. And so what happens to us is, here's the illustration. I always say that when people are polarized, you've got two people on opposite sides. You've got people, the Republicans and Democrats, or you've got people that are one particular philosophy versus another particular philosophy.
This religion, that religion.
Yeah. And so what happens is they always try to solve it by amplifying their information. Yeah, but don't. And here's why I'm right, because X, Y, and Z. No, you're wrong for Z, Q, R, and S.
And I'm right because, yeah.
And there's an ever escalating tension between the two, because in a polarity, it's not that the other person needs more information. There's nobody with a central perspective, or nobody, another way to say it, nobody with a meta perspective. Everybody's inside the conversation. Nobody's outside of it.
So describe what a meta perspective is.
I was hoping you would ask that. So in grad school, there was always a camera in the upper corner of every counseling room. And the client families all had to sign paperwork saying, we understand there's a camera and those films will be used for the purpose of training the interns. So I get in a counseling session and I see things and I feel things and I say things and I engage in certain ways. And then I step out and I replay the video and I watch from above, which, by the way, is a meta perspective. A meta perspective is when you get out of the conversation and look at it, or out of the exchange, out of the pattern, and you look at it from the outside. I will tell you, I would watch those videos and go, I didn't say that. Or I look at it and go, why did I say that? Or here's the thing, I'd look at it and go, oh, they pulled me into their pattern,
their system, their pattern.
Person who was used to being criticized, I ended up criticizing them. The person who was getting used to like being allowed to get away with things, I would overlook things. And unconsciously, if I didn't learn to develop that meta perspective, I would just jump right into the pattern of the family. And it's why family therapy as a model is so potent, is because it, by definition, espouses that meta perspective. You can't be in the system and change it if you can't at least have the meta perspective from outside the system, so that you recognize when I feel a pull to respond a certain way, oh, there's a reason.
Tension, if you feel anger, if you feel any of that kind of stuff, those are clues or cues to you're getting sucked in.
Someone in the family gets criticized all the time.
Yeah.
And in the middle of a family session, I just want to go, why do you keep, and I realize halfway through the sentence, I just did what the family's always done. But with the meta perspective, getting that above systemic viewpoint, I look at it and go, okay, when I feel that tug, that's me feeling the pressure that everybody in the family lives with every day. But let's make the leap. The question you ask first. The same thing happens in organizations, whether small businesses, medium, doesn't matter. Within human systems, within human organizations, people get pulled into unconscious reactions, both based on their own family of origin and the many repeating patterns within the organization itself. And the reason that organizations get so trapped is they're unconscious and they're feeling the same pressure that everyone's feeling. No one gets meta because they're all within the family. If a consultant can come in and be meta, and typically a consultant will come in, but after they've been there 2 or 3 times, they get pulled in and they either become in an alliance with 1 or 2 of the people, or they become lumped in as a scapegoat with certain other people, and they can't navigate the system because they've joined it too much.
Wow.
They get
so then they become not helpful. They become part of the system.
Yeah, they're systemically impotent.
Yeah. And one of the things I think about going meta is you become the observer.
Yes.
And so you become an observer within systems. So say you're counseling, but also in corporations and companies, you are an outside observer, and you have to stay at that level and not get sucked into their cycle and their patterns, and be aware.
Yeah.
But then also for yourself, how do you not repeat your family of origins in every system? Because it's mind blowing when you start thinking of the levels. It's holy cow. Am I looking for somebody relationally to repeat my family of origin because I feel comfortable with that pattern? I know that pattern. So if I were to just say you're the irresponsible one in the family and you've always dated oldest responsible people, and you're like, but then eventually you're like, why do they always tell me what to do? And and you're always wondering, it's like they always are so bossy and all that. But it's like you are actually looking for somebody to solve this systemic cycle.
Things don't feel balanced until you find somebody that fits.
So
And so you're unconsciously searching out someone who fits the patterns. And this is why we say you're repeating your family of origin patterns. As we say it until you don't.
Yeah.
But a more sophisticated answer is until you become conscious of your own magnetic draw to repeat the cycle. So here's what people miss a lot of times is when you recognize what goes wrong and think in a linear fashion, people look for opposites. Oh, my parents were addicts, so I'm going to find somebody who's not addicted. And the assumption is if I find someone who doesn't drink and doesn't do cocaine, that I found somebody who's not addicted, but they don't realize they can be addicted to religion. They can be addicted to performance. They can be addicted to work. And they may find someone who behaves the opposite, but at the core emotional level are exactly the same person. And you don't know that until you've already dug deep into the system and you've been pulled into producing your pattern.
Yeah.
So when you say you become meta or you get outside the system, you've got to, and you hit it a second ago, you have to learn to do that for yourself too. Oh, why do I feel this draw? Why do I feel so pulled into either whatever reaction I feel would be natural? We have to stop and go, that natural reaction is part of my training. My nervous system, and here's what happens, the unconscious mind, or another way to say that is the central nervous system becomes very familiar with a set of interactions, including my part of it.
It is so comforting and dopamine releasing.
To use the language we've used recently,
Yeah.
I feel so much like myself. And so when, as an oldest child, I'm telling everybody else what to do, I feel so much like myself. When, as an oldest child, I feel guilty and feel responsible for things I'm not responsible for, at least I feel like myself. If I'm not having those struggles, I don't feel like myself. And so my brain says, hey, I'll offer you some dopamine if you would go tell that person what to do, even though it's not your job to tell them what to do. Now, I pick on oldest children because the responsibility and over responsibility thing is an easier one to see. I'm a youngest child.
It is. It's so fascinating to watch and like experience.
Yeah.
However, you have some oldest child
I do.
tendencies.
Yeah, I do. And there's a couple different reasons why.
These are all stereotypes. So that means that, but go through them real quick.
Yeah. The stereotype would be that the oldest child becomes what I described earlier, over responsible. It's a helpful way to recognize the power of the systemic unfolding, right? As the parents have their first child, they've got one child and that child gets all the attention. And when the second child comes along, the first one's old enough to, hey, can you get me a diaper? Hey, can you bring me a bottle? And that sense of responsibility and their sense of value as a responsible person starts just as a natural response to how they fit in. The middle child, the second one is, oh, someone went to get me a bottle and they're just being taken care of. But then the third child comes along. Again, I come from a 3-child system and I'm the youngest, so I'm that third child. Now I've replaced the middle child and the oldest child is still responsible for 2 extra people as well as whatever the parents ask them to do. The middle child's been replaced, so they feel like they're replaceable. And I'm the youngest child, which I call the last cute one. Right.
Yes.
And the youngest child, not only are they the last cute one, so they're used to, oh, look how sweet, oh, look how cute. They're used to that kind of attention, but they're also used to, I don't have to take care of stuff because everybody else will. So in the same sense, the oldest child can be over-responsible and the youngest child can develop a sense of under-responsibility. Now, I really have to fight that.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I think I developed some of the older child characteristics over time is my sister moved out of the family system while I was still in it. And because my brother, the middle child and scapegoat, which is also common for the middle child, and he's passed away now, so I can say this stuff with relative freedom, but because he was playing the scapegoat role so well, I had to step up and become a more responsible person because of his level of irresponsibility.
Yeah.
And in the absence of my sister and my brother's dysfunction, I stepped up and began to take on some oldest children characteristics around the house, helping out, helping my mom not feel so stressed when I felt like I could. And so I've got a lot of the youngest child. Everything's going to be fine. But I've also got the oldest child, but someone's got to take care of this, and it might have to be me.
Yeah.
So all that stuff you bring with you until you start looking and going, maybe those things don't serve me as well as they once did. And it may well be that some of the problems I face in life, whether in the businesses that I'm a part of, that I start, or the organizations that I participate in, maybe some of the ways that I experience that are more about the lens that I brought with me than about what's actually true. And so we have that unconscious nervous system response until we can become conscious enough, not just meta to the system, but meta to my own internal responses.
You forgot to mention one of the stereotypes.
Which one is it?
That always gets
For some reason, I always forget this one.
Only
but
child.
You're always
I am
good.
an only child. And so I get to have all three of them. And so I get to choose which one I want to be.
Yeah.
The one that suits me the best at the time.
And we joke around about it, but I fairly consistently forget that when I teach
It's funny.
about that.
Yeah.
And she often has to remind me because, again, an only child, there's no other kids. The parents can get distracted. So an only child can sometimes be a bit neglected.
Yeah.
Not always. Sometimes they get
But
extra
also,
attention.
You're also expected to be older than you are.
Yeah.
Because you're an only, not always. Sometimes you're treated as a baby for a very long time and you actually never grow up and leave the house kind of scenarios. Now remember, when we talk about stereotypes, if you're like, yeah, I'm an oldest child, I don't have that experience, or I'm a middle child, I'm not the scapegoat, or I don't feel like the last cute one, or stereotypes are, there's enough evidence of
It's consistent enough.
it's consistent enough of repeated patterns that they're able to create a stereotype based on oldest, middle, youngest, only
And
child.
the point would be to recognize that the family system you grew up in functioned a certain way and you fit into it in a certain way. And learning the role that you played can help you start to recognize what are the things that motivate me? What are the things that trip me up? What are the things that are my strengths? And to what degree are they connected to the system that I was a part of growing up? And then how have I recreated that in the organization I own, run, am a part of, serve?
It's so crazy. And I teach this stuff and I work with my clients, but it always surprises me still that we literally recreate our family of origin until we don't. Everywhere we go and everything that we do, we recreate the place, our belief systems, our patterns of our family of origin, whether relationships, work, and it's mind-boggling at the level. And I think it's fun when you start recognizing it personally, and incredibly important to recognize that personally, but recognition isn't enough.
Right.
So when you start recognizing it's like, wow, I'm always wanting to take responsibility for somebody else, or I only feel love when I give gifts. Because I had to do things for performance, kind of what we talked about in the identity in episode 8. You start recognizing it, but recognizing it isn't enough, especially when it's systemic.
Yeah.
Especially, oh crap, I am in a 3-year contract in this corporation that I'm working for, or I started a company.
And it looks just like my family of origin.
And I'm like, I'm in the growth stages of my to that. I was thinking differently about health, and I'm in the growth stages of that. And I've hired one person, and I work with some other people and stuff. But I'm like, as we expand, I know it's going to get bigger, and I'm going to hire more. And it's like, how do I not repeat my family of origin? So just talking about that is like recognition is important. It's number one. You have to become the observer of self
Right.
and of the system. But then what?
Yeah. So let's look at the mechanisms for a moment. And all of my answers are an hour long, but I realize your podcast isn't an hour long. So I'm going to try to keep this.
Yeah.
So the mechanisms have to do with the idea that we get this picture of who we are and how we get love, acceptance, value, et cetera, in the ongoing mirror of our family. The way mom treats us, the way dad treats us, the way siblings treat us, the way that mirrors back to us where we get our value from, who and what we are, and like what's important about us. But it does it at such an unconscious level that we live that out unconsciously. And the thing that often doesn't get talked about is, we've already talked about consciousness, but I'm going to repeat some of that. But below, once we've started that journey, the thing that often doesn't get talked about is the emotional component. I.e., when I experience that from my family, I feel good about myself. When I experience that from my family, I feel like a failure again and again. When I experience that in my family, it's a deep core emotional response, which may not actually be true about who you are, but it feels so, and the word feel, I'm referring to emotion,
right.
Feels so true about who you are, you will return to it with every fiber of your being because it feels like who you are.
It's almost like addiction.
Yes. It's exactly like addiction, at least in the sense that you get dopamine for it.
Yeah.
So let's start with consciousness, because you've already said that. We've both kind of said that meta perspective is also another way to describe become conscious, become the observer, step outside the pattern, watch not just the organization, but watch yourself as a part of the organization, and recognize. I often say, if everybody out there is driving too slow, odds are actually good that you're actually driving too fast. So step outside the organization and look at yourself enough to go, is there any way that I can see that I'm creating the reactions that I keep getting? But then, what emotions drive that? I'm not talking about like, just get in touch with your feeling, but what I am saying is, if that emotional component stays the same, the behavior will stay the same. And so there is a piece of this where we've got to develop the emotional intelligence to go, okay, there are some unhealthy emotional attachments I have to always being the one with the answers. There's some unhealthy emotional attachments I have to always being the persecuted one. There's some unhealthy, whatever our role in our family, we develop an emotional sense of self connected to that. And that until those emotions develop some flexibility and we can learn to handle them in a healthy way instead of an unhealthy way, because emotions are designed to move us. Until those change, they'll always move us in the direction they've always moved us.
So what about the person my boss is always a jerk? Like, what do I do about that? Like, they're just a jerk all the time. And I can't do anything about that. And they're just going to be a jerk to me. And I can't just sit there and not respond.
I would pose two questions. The first question is, how many other people in authority over you have been jerks throughout your lifetime? Is your boss the only jerk that you've been subject to?
Yeah.
Or is there a long trail of jerks that have been over you?
Always have jerky bosses.
My mom was a jerk. My kindergarten teacher was a jerk.
I was a jerk.
And that's the first question, is help people recognize that somehow their soul,
myself with jerks.
Somehow their soul found it again.
But it's not my fault they're a jerk.
It's absolutely not your fault that they're a jerk, but it is your responsibility to figure out how to find new patterns. Because the unconscious pattern that pulled you into jerky relationships is your responsibility to examine and change. And so I guess there's three questions. The second question is, what about you tolerates that on the front end until you don't anymore?
Yeah.
There's always a grooming orange flags before the red flags show up. And what about you is drawn to that? Do you feel safer? Do you feel familiar? Do you feel maybe I can get revenge? Whatever it is. What about you tolerates it? But then the third thing, if you're in a position and you want to stay in that position, but your boss is a jerk, can you learn a whole new way of seeing, communicating, and setting boundaries that you can live with in the presence of jerks in authority? And that's depending on how jerky they are. If they're if they're a personality disorder, it might be that the best answer is get out.
Yeah.
But if it's, they've got some really,
But you always attract a personality disorder, abusive people.
right.
Yeah.
And so you have to do the inside work to, what do I tolerate? Why am I attracted? Why are they attracted to me?
Yeah.
That's a whole conversation on its own.
Real quick, I go back to the second one because I think this can be really hard for people to hear, especially in the context of we're doing a podcast. We're not doing a one-on-one consultation, coaching, counseling. And so it can be really hard to hear. Wait, you're saying that I'm responsible for, it can be heard, like you're saying that I'm responsible for their anger. Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
No. However, one of the things that we can hear is, but you're saying I'm responsible that I put myself in this position.
I am saying that.
Yeah. And that can be really hard to hear, especially for the first time.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of different types of people that will hear this and go, forget you. How rude. Ouch. In your core, it's right. Like you feel it. And you're just like,
you just
I
don't like
want to
it.
hear this. I don't like, you can't tell me what to do. You're not the boss of it.
Stop being a jerk.
You're such a jerk. I'm turning this off. But that thing that is, it's true. You're like, and the other thing I want to add though, is that it's really freaking cool.
Right.
That you can actually become the observer yourself and be responsible. It's like, wait, I can change this. Even though I don't like hearing it. Ouch. It feels gross and tension and squirmy, but it's something that I have authority to change. And so, but then there's the other person who, again, is the relief. Is, oh my gosh, this is so relieving that I can actually change. When I become the observer of self and I start noticing the patterns of what I've come from in my family, but then what I've recreated in every system of my life, like it is so empowering and freeing. And so recognizing it, becoming the observer, 2, taking responsibility. Which can be scratchy.
Let me pause right there because I want to say something. Depending on how you learned this concept in your family growing up may determine which of those people you are.
Yes. 100%.
If you grew up in a family where blame was always a part of the environment, it's really important to understand the difference between blame and responsibility. Because in a family where blame is part of the atmosphere, it's like it's your fault and you suck.
Or it's the world's fault and it.
Bummer.
The world sucks.
Yeah. So you're stuck. But responsibility is different in that responsibility, as Polly said ago, gives you power. If you're being blamed, you're powerless. But if you're responsible, you're not responsible for the other person's choices, the other person's behavior, even the other person's character, but you are responsible to go, how will I manage me starting now? Key shift, because that's how you become that third person who, no, now that I see this, I have the power to make a change.
Yeah.
So we talk about the observer position, becoming conscious, stepping outside. We talk about recognizing the roles and recognizing you're part of it. And so I mentioned the couple things. Number 1, start to do the emotional management, i.e., what are the emotions in me that pulled me into this and what if that's unhealthy? But now there's some external things, right? The external things are, can I start communicating in a brand new way? So communication, there's predictable patterns to communication, especially when you're repeating the patterns of your family of origin. They say this, you say this. When you say this, they say that. When they say that, you say this. And when you learn to interrupt the patterns of communication, you interrupt the patterns of interaction.
Yeah. Can you give an example?
Let's say part of the boss being a jerk is that they blame. Let's take what we were just talking about. They blame. And when the boss blames you, if you grew up in a family where you were blamed for a lot of things, you get shamed and you get angry about it, you get defensive. And so that makes the boss more controlling because you just got defensive. They get angry at you for being defensive. But if you can shift the pattern of communication, and instead of getting angry and defensive, they say to you, you did it again, Hamp. And you go, let me see if I understand correctly. It sounds like you're saying you feel like I'm responsible for this. Is that what you're saying? So that moment of, instead of reacting out of defensiveness, you're actually holding up a verbal and emotional boundary that says, it sounds like you're saying this. Is that what you're saying?
Can you help me understand? Yeah.
Yeah. So those patterns of communication where you don't just react to the jerky boss, but instead you learn how to internally process, think it through, come up with something that says, I'm not going to accept blame. If there's something I'm responsible for, I'll look at that, but I'm not going to accept blame. But I can't tell the boss that I'm not going to accept it. So I'm going to ask the boss, are you saying this is my fault? Now they either have to commit or change. But learning how to change that pattern of communication puts the emotional weight where it belongs. Again, the whole power of the unconscious emotional thing. When you take the blame, it's a transfer of emotional weight to your guts. And when you hold up that communicational boundary that says, hang on, I'm not going to accept that unconsciously. You have to say it to me directly, or you have to own it. And you don't have to say it rude. In fact, you shouldn't, because you're not going to be triggered by that.
Right. Doesn't mean you won't feel triggered. Doesn't mean you won't feel scared and anxious and but it is that place you can feel those things and still respond from an observer connected place. And when we're talking about that, the bottom part of your brain is survival, the top part of your brain is about connection. And so we do some other teachings on that. But it is very much a response of staying connected to self, even though inside you might be going, I just want to rip his head off. Or can I throw a punch on his? Hold on. Can you help me understand? I hear this. Is that what you're saying? And having that conversation doesn't mean you're going to feel peaceful.
Yeah.
I
And
think that's important.
we might as well say getting to that point is a process.
It is.
When you have unconscious emotional responses and you start becoming conscious, you don't suddenly become a wizard at communicating well. You just become unconscious of how much you have not communicated.
We always joke, or I joke. I was like, when I change, and I'm like, I am a professional communicator. Like, you are a professional communicator.
I are.
You are. You is, and you are, and you're all the things. And this is what we do professionally. And then if there's conflict between us, and it's like, there was some tension a few years ago that was like, we were working through some
way back in time.
It was way back in time now, for real. But it was like, we may be professionals, but when you're in the heat of it, it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Because it's so personal and it's patterned. It's so ingrained.
Right.
And it's that thing. It's like, so just as you start shifting it, the fact that you're recognizing it, you start recognizing it is huge.
Huge.
And then I'd love to have you back on the podcast at some time to talk about communication. How do we do this? However, he's got courses on TD Academy. I'll put all of this in the show notes, our Academy website that
We've got some together where we actually demonstrate.
We demonstrate, but it's a long story. But it's great content. It was, again, we are professionals. And we were in the middle of some really hard stuff together and learning how to do it. And it was hard. It's hard when your emotions are so personal and connected and protective.
And it's why we say you repeat your family of origin patterns until you don't, because just becoming aware, the first thing it makes you aware of is just how out of control you feel. Because even though you're aware, change is still a few steps away. Then you have to look at those emotions and learn to regulate in the face of things that you don't normally regulate. In something where normally you get upset, feel guilty, feel shamed, feel angry, you have to learn to go,
deep breath.
And it's like someone saying, hey, I've noticed you have a temper when you drive. Would you change that? So the next time you drive, you're like, of course I will. And then someone pulls out in front of you and it's all the familiar feelings come back up.
It does sound familiar.
I'm conscious, but I still am doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
So consciousness is the first step. That meta position is the first step. But then learning to recognize and regulate. And then once you recognize and regulate, then you communicate in a different pattern and learn to set some boundaries and not accept responsibility that's not yours. And over time, if you're a piece of a puzzle and you create that puzzle around you, over time, you reshape the puzzle piece that you are. And so you reshape the puzzles that you fit into.
One of the things that you've done this with families and you've changed families. Like you're so good at the I'm always like, I don't want to work with families. I can help one person recognize and communicate in a new way and help them really process that. But you're so good at sitting with families. And then you take this into the business world, which I think is a whole nother level of understanding, because everybody comes with their family. I have one person will sit in my office and I know that they have a whole family system with them.
It's that introject I mentioned earlier. That their family system lives inside them.
Yes.
And they live inside it.
Yes. And so when you go into companies and corporations and businesses, and then each person is, like you said, it's multiverse.
Right.
Each person has their family of origin that they bring, but then you look and it's like, wow, everybody's playing it out so perfectly.
Yeah.
And usually it's the boss, not always, but usually it's the boss's family that they like, oh, this person reminds me of Aunt Sally. This person reminds me of my drunk Uncle Bob. It's all going to hire them because they make me feel familiar.
I feel like myself.
And so they create this. So you're so good at the corporate level as well. Is there anything that you want to say about just the stuff that you love to do? I asked you about your blaze in the first podcast in episode 8 and talking about identity, but is there something in the blaze that you love to do within the corporate world, within the system aspect of it? What is that blaze and fire for you?
Yeah. So when you asked about the identity piece, the thing I said is I love when the light bulb goes on.
Yeah.
And someone knows they'll never be the same after that. But then what happens next, because of what we've been talking about for this entire podcast, then it starts to change the way they parent. They thought they were going to be a better CEO or a better C-suite member, but then they become a better parent and a better spouse. And it's like
a better friend. And
as their eyes are open to who they are and they take that meta perspective and they're not just changed internally. I love watching them come back and say, I thought I was working on my role as a leader and my marriage got better.
Yeah.
And my child is more talkative. And I love watching the ripple effect on relationships.
It's massive.
When somebody's lights go on.
Yeah. It's so fun. So thank you for coming and talking about family of origin. I know we could spend 2 hours having these conversations. It's hard to keep these under an hour. And then I'd love to have you back and talk about communication. So in the show notes, I will put all of how you can get connected to this amazing man. Yes, I am a bit biased. However, he is amazing. And to get connected with Bob Hamp. And if you have a company that you work for or work with and are looking for consulting and organizational consulting, he is your man. He's incredible at it. And again, I know I'm biased, but he's actually very good. And he's done several companies and incredible at it.
I'm very, very comfortable with the bias.
You're very comfortable. Good. He also has a book called Think Differently, Learn Differently. He has 3 books, Live Differently, Lead Differently, and then Learn Differently. But specifically for this podcast today, Learn Differently to really understand the family system. Live Differently also talks about it. And then Lead Differently is his leadership book, which talks about system. But the leadership book isn't about like just business leadership. It's everybody's a leader, and how do you do that? But Think Differently, Learn Differently. It's a really fun way of communicating, especially going deeper into communication.
Yeah.
Also, I'll put the websites for the Academy, Think Differently Academy, and go check all of that out. Make sure to follow and subscribe and share. And we will see you next time. Thank you for joining me on Be a Blaze podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to Be a Blaze podcast. If today's episode sparked something in you, don't keep the fire to yourself. Follow, like, download, and share it with a friend who needs the fire. Let's keep blazing trails together. This is Polly Hamp, and I will see you next time.